Pictures of you, pictures of me, hung upon your wall for the world to see. Pictures of you, pictures of me, remind us all of what we could have been. Pictures of you, pictures of me, hung upon your...
Relive every moment true to life with True Capture technology, only from Canon.
Indeed, Laurie. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason I'm here, the specialist area that I actually deal with is risk, crisis and recovery management in tourism. In fact, one of the things that I do, as Laurie said, I've been working in the industry for 30 years. I ran a National Tourist Office for 12 of those. I ran the Israel Government Tourist Office. I also still am the National Secretary of the Eastern Mediterranean Tourism Association. And as you can imagine, as you've heard the news this year and the last year in Syria, Egypt, the Arab Spring problems in Greece, dealing with risk and dealing with crisis and dealing with recovery is pretty much stock in trade for the work that I do. I'm also very involved with the Pacific Asia Travel Association's what we call the Rapid Response Task Force. And Rapid Response Task Force is really about dealing with risks and crises and trying to solve them, and also in many cases to try and help both governments. We deal with 49 national tourism ministries in PATA, plus also about 1,200 companies from 60 countries. We help give them the tools, in a sense, to try and help them avert crises and to be prepared for risk, as well as manage them if they happen to occur. So that's a little bit of quick background. Okay. Let's go to us. Everybody knows Dorothea McKellar's wonderful poem, I Love a Sunburnt Country. I think you can all read, so I won't do the Leonard Teal and read I Love a Sunburnt Country, a land of sweeping plains, etc. I could do it, but we haven't got time for it. It's interesting, actually, just a couple of nights ago before I was coming to Broken Hill, I was watching the news on Channel 10, Channel 7 and others, which told us that Broken Hill was totally flooded, the entire place was underwater. What it didn't actually tell you was that some of the approach roads leading into and out of Broken Hill were underwater. But hey, if you want to get a good news story, go big, go a little bit exaggerated. And it's very interesting that over the last couple of years, we've seen in Australia that a lot of places very popular with tourism have either been affected by floods, bushfires or drought. In fact, last time I was here in Broken Hill, which was, God, an awfully long time ago, it was at the end of a 7-year drought, and it looked absolutely dreadful. So one of the first things that we try to do in terms of dealing with risk and crisis, I'm not going to tell you too much about how to defend Broken Hill and the Outback from Al-Qaeda terrorists. I'll leave that for other countries, but I will try and focus on some of those risks and some of those negative events which can actually impact negatively on tourism to your part of the world. So there are our great threats here: drought, fire, bushfires, floods, etc. Now the important thing to understand is that 95% of what constitutes a crisis is actually people's perceptions. So in other words, as we know here, we're in Broken Hill now, we can walk down all the main streets, everything is fine, all the pubs are open, but there's a perception out there in tourism land, your tourism source markets, that the place is flooded. So the first thing that we always need to do in dealing with risks is to correct the perception. I'll give you an example of something that our task force actually did in Thailand at the end of last year with the Thai Tourism Authority. As you know, in late last year, November, December, there were a lot of floods in Thailand. So one of the things that the Thai Tourism Authority did, which I recommend to everybody, was firstly to use Google Images, to use Google Earth, and to actually project live scenes of what a place was like in real time. So in other words, instead of the media saying Chiang Mai is under flood, we could actually put on the PATA website and other areas, this is actually what Chiang Mai really looks like this very, very second. So in other words, we don't tell lies, we don't exaggerate, we show things actually as they are, because in many cases, one of the great struggles that every destination, every business has to try to do is to counter the perception with the facts. Really important. Rule number one. Okay. Now, we've got a lot of challenges for tourism to New South Wales and particularly to Outback New South Wales. Obviously, we've been hearing about it for the last couple of days. I'm glad I've heard a lot of the previous presentations so that I don't try and trip over. Yes, there's the tyranny of the distance. There's also the tyranny of cost. There's also a lot of competition out there, not only from international destinations and international businesses, but obviously within Australia. Okay, let me hurl a challenge at you, ladies and gentlemen, because you've been hearing from all the experts over the last couple of days. The airfare that my university paid for me to come out here was around about $630. And as you can see, there are an awful lot of other places I can go to which will be for the same price or less. So my challenge to you, and I'll just take a couple of comments, looking at those facts, looking at the facts that I could go to Kuala Lumpur, to Manila, to Fiji, to the Sunshine Coast where John comes from, to Cairns, to Perth, from Sydney for less than it costs to Broken Hill. Why the hell would I come here? In other words, what are you going to do to convince me as a Sydney latte drinking eastern suburbs snooty snob, how are you going to convince us city slickers to come to Broken Hill rather than go to Bali? Yeah.
David, I think our symposium would be meaningless without you.
Are you paying him?
There you go. Very nice. Lovely answer. Seriously, what would you say? You've heard from some beautiful places. What would be why would people, in other words, my real question to you is why are people going to pay a premium to come out here? Why?
They're going to have a better time.
They'll have a better time, true, and it's a fantastic place. Yeah, better time. What else? Yeah.
I organise push bike riding right out in the bush.
Yeah.
I've got these people that keep coming back for more punishment every year.
So you deal with the masochist market.
Yeah, so this year we're riding from Broken Hill to Birdsville and back to Inaminka.
Okay, so that's a special experience. That's an experience. Sorry, you were going to say?
I was going to say for an authentic Australian experience.
And you know something? People will pay for authenticity. So you've got to really hit that. Last night at last night's fantastic function, I watched that terrific ad that was being done for Lightning Ridge. That ad, which was quirky, which was funny, which was a bit off the beaten track, I'd say I'd pay extra money to go for that. That's great. So in other words, the challenge in a sense is people will pay a premium to have a unique experience. Now, Tourism Australia is trying to sell uniqueness. And these are some of the things you have to overcome. Now, this whole issue, of course, isn't a crisis, but it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. And also, too, when a lot of countries in the world, and even a lot of Australians, are doing it a little bit tougher than they'd like to, they are counting their pennies, but they will be prepared to spend extra money for something which is going to be on their bucket list. That's important. Okay. So, we have a few other challenges for outback tourism. Firstly, and I think John's covered this and other speakers, lack of media exposure. Tourism, Outback New South Wales, Outback generally doesn't get as much media coverage as it could do. And I'm going to give you a couple of ideas perhaps on how to improve that. We do have genuine problems of accessibility. After all, from Sydney, and I use Sydney because that's where I come from, there are 2 Rex flights a day. No Jumbos, no 737s, no Virgin, no Jetstar. And Rex is terrific, but because of that issue, obviously Rex can't do cheapy fares when there's only 2 flights a day. That is the commercial fact of life. There's also, too, a lack of knowledge, particularly in some of your potential source markets, and I don't just talk about Sydney or Melbourne, I talk about Frankfurt and Essen and Amsterdam. People in Germany, Holland, Switzerland, etc. really get off on doing something quirky, but they don't necessarily know about what there is to offer here. So getting that message out is absolutely critical. Then we also have the lack of knowledge from the people who sell travel. Your average travel agent knows diddly squat I've been involved through the Eastern Mediterranean Tourism Association, which I've been running for 12 years. We've trained 8,000 travel agents about the Eastern Med. One of our secrets, which is a secret that I'd like to pass on to you, is the reason we've been successful is we have 27 members, most of them are wholesalers, national tourist officers, etc. They're all competitors, but we band forces together to train the people who sell, A, to be aware about those Eastern Mediterranean destinations, B, to know who's actually selling them, what product there is. So we actually do training and product. This year we've gone a step further, as well as doing our travel agent roadshow, which we've been doing for donkey's years. We've got a stand going out at the holiday and travel shows in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, so that Australian tourists are aware of it there. Those shows actually are really good in many cases. Whether you do a part of Travel Mart, whether you decide that you're going to have a presence at ITB Berlin or the World Travel Mart in London, you've got to get your message out there, and you're not, because it costs a lot of money to do it as you can be friendly competitors and do it, because the costs, if you share the costs are not that great. Okay. As I mentioned to you before, there's this huge myth, there's this huge gulf between perception and reality. As I said, I thought on Wednesday night, the night before I was coming here, that I was going to have to swim down down the main street of Broken Hill. Obviously I didn't need to do that. So again, a critical challenge in dealing with risk is the ability to try and challenge perception. Perception is your greatest enemy. The perception that it's hard to get here, the perception that it might be rough, the perception that the locals might not be welcoming. You know, there've been a couple of bad films about Broken Hill, there's been a lot of good ones as well too. But it's important to get, the Broken Hill I've experienced in the last couple of days has just been absolutely fantastic. I will tell everybody I know what a great place it is here. I've been through a lot of parts of Outback New South Wales, it's brilliant, but we've got to get that message out. Okay.
We want to send every customer away with that idea in his head.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to make it very simple. I do very academic definitions about what risk and crisis is. But this is my definition of risk and crisis. We talk about a crisis as we're up shit creek without a paddle. So we need to be able to have the paddles available. And that's in a sense what crisis management is about. So in other words, in order to avert a crisis, you need to be very well prepared. What you need to do out in terms of risk is what are your actual contingency plans should something go on? Let's say, for example, we talk about floods. Who do we get the message out to that the place isn't in flood? Who do we get the message out as to what is open, what is closed, which transport routes are available, which transport routes are not? We need to have a plan in place. It's no good responding to a negative event 3 weeks after it's happened, you've lost it. You've got to respond within an hour. Now our people at the PRRT, the Parter Rapid Response Task Force, I love that, sounds like sort of Ghostbusters of crisis. Our brief is basically within an hour of a negative event occurring, we invite the National Tourist Office, Regional Tourist Office, whatever it is, our assistance. If they don't want it, that's fine, they can sometimes do it themselves, but we're ready to go within an hour. And that's actually how it has to be. If an airline crashes, and this is a normal IATA practice, they already have a spokesperson out there within the first hour, because the first hour of something negative happening is when you've got to respond. No good waiting until a committee meets and discusses what we may or may not do. So contingency planning is absolutely critical. Doesn't matter whether you're a small business, doesn't matter whether you're a big business. Look at the damage, for example, to the Costa Concordia or the Costa Cruise Company at the moment. They've been very slow to respond to the sinking in Italy and the engine blowing up in the middle of the Indian Ocean, or wherever. Yeah, it was the middle of the Indian Ocean. They just got into the Seychelles this morning. So again, being responsive, very important. Okay. And here are, there's a whole lot of different risks which are sometimes beyond management control. As I say, you can read all of these, but let's, one of probably the biggest issues that apply to Outback New South Wales certainly are the natural disasters, or the perception of natural disasters, and also to the economic issues. You need to have answers to those, because when we talk about what actually is a crisis is not when you've had a downturn of 5% in business. A crisis is when you've got a downturn in business or arrival numbers of 50%. That's a crisis. So severity is very important. Essentially, you need to have those tools. Let me just move along. Okay. Negative perceptions. Now, you know these facts. The fact that here in Outback New South Wales, and I know this as a tourist, you get a really warm welcome. People are usually glad to see you, unless you're a complete jerk. Secondly, it's important that even when there is a negative event, be it fire, flood or drought, tourism attractions, operations, accommodations are still working. Now, about 9 years ago, I did an exercise with Tourism in New South Wales. I went out to Wellington and Jindabyne, Wellington, New South Wales, and Jindabyne. Jindabyne just after a huge bushfire where you can still see, today, the evidence that occurred. And a lot of people thought, I better not go there, they've had a terrible fire. So it's really important just to lay out that welcome mat. Yes, we had a fire, but everything's still operating, we want you to come. Let people know they are welcome. That's step number one. The second thing is to let people know, and again, one of the negative perceptions about Outback New South Wales and regional and rural Australia generally is there's bugger all to do. Well, I just went walking around Broken Hill at 6 o'clock this morning just to sort of get a little bit of bearing. I didn't have those two lovely ladies to be my walking tour guide who were there last night who got the award. But the first thing that struck me is, this is an amazing place. There is so much to see and so much to do. There's so many opportunities. Let people know that. And again, in promoting and publicising the Outback, let people know all the possibilities, because one of the most important things is not just getting people to come here, but getting them to stay. Singapore was very proud when it got its average stay from 2 days to 3 days. Broken Hill can do better than that, and so can other parts of Outback New South Wales, particularly if you combine destinations. Okay, and I sort of thought, when I was putting this together, this was just a couple of the unique attractions. I don't have to tell you about that because you know them all a lot better than I do, and I know, even from what I've seen in 36 hours of being here, that's just the tip of the iceberg, and that's important. Okay, so as I mentioned to you before, a large part of what constitutes a potential crisis in a business is perception. If people think that a place is impossible to get to because it's all flooded, if they think that the place is dreadful to come to, they can't drink water because there's a drought, then they're not going to come. So you need to be able to make sure that you're communicating the reality of of how the situation actually is. And you don't just do it to the public, you do it to those people who sell travel. Believe me, one thing I've learnt about particularly running a Middle Eastern national tourism organisation is that travel agents and the members of the public often read the same newspapers, develop the same opinion. So don't lay yourself under the misapprehension that travel agents actually know more than the general public. 9 times out of 10, they don't. And I'm a great believer that you actually have to do the balancing of your marketing and selling and promotion, both to the trade as well as to the public. It's a big balancing act, like a seesaw. Make sure the seesaw is kind of balancing. Okay. The media, and I'm not talking about John Alwyn Jones's media, respectable, correct, accurate to a fault, but the general media loves to gild the lily. I interviewed Rupert Murdoch some years ago when I was doing my doctoral thesis, and the first thing that he told, I actually asked him, what makes news? It was very relevant to the thesis I was writing at the time. He gave me 10 criteria, I won't go through them all. 7 of them were negative, 2 of them were positive, and 1 was kind of in between. So in other words, if it bleeds, it leads. If it's bad news, it sells newspapers, it gets people watching programs, it has high ratings. We love a disaster, particularly if it's somebody else's. And the news media is not afraid of making that disaster or that problem look a hell of a lot worse than it is. Okay, very, very simply, when we're dealing with crisis, there are 4 R's, but the most important one that I can stress here is readiness. Do you know what your potential problems are, and are you ready to deal with them and deal with them immediately? Now, you don't have to worry about preparing for an avalanche. You don't have to worry about preparing probably for Al-Qaeda attacks. There's a lot of things you don't have to worry about. Focus on the things that you do need to worry about. Get them right, practice them. One of the things that I've often been involved in training people in risk and crisis management is to actually do drills. What do we do? Let's do a simulation. I'm not going to say we do it now, but do simulation games about the things that could happen. Then the other thing, the third sector, obviously I mentioned about response, but reduction's important. So I use very often in crisis management issues what we call the isolation strategy. That is, we let people know what the problem is and put it in its wider context. Let's look at, for example, the last couple of days. Access problems to Broken Hill because of flooding. Okay, let people know about that. Which roads are open, which roads are closed. We then also let people know that when you get to Broken Hill, everything's running as per normal. And a lot of people don't know that. You know it because we're here. But a lot of people outside don't. So again, making sure that people are fully in the know, and making sure that if you see negative press reports, and this is really the role in a sense of the Regional Tourism Association, not necessarily every hotelier in town, but if there is a stupid report, counter it. Be there, be alert, definitely not alarmed. Okay, now it's also important to understand when we're talking about marketing, I talked about the balance of pull and push marketing. Pull marketing is that marketing that you do to direct to the consumer. Push marketing is that marketing you do direct to the industry, the people who could potentially sell your product. And that also, of course, can include whether you deal with websites like Expedia or Zuji or any of those. I mean, they're all potential marketing tools. I know, there are wholesalers who do great jobs, and I was a wholesaler for 4 years. I'm all in favour of wholesalers. But I think also too, you have to remember, and it's one thing I always see because I have students who are about 19, 20, 21, etc. Every student, and I ask them, how many of you do your bookings through the internet? I tell you, every single hand goes up. How many people book through a travel agent? I see 1 or 2. So the young people, the young travellers are doing things online. Remember it, be aware of it. I'm painfully aware of it, even though I try to tell them to use travel agents because for all sorts of reasons. Okay, the other thing which is important, there's been a fair bit of talk in the last couple of days about research. And market research is really important, but certainly market research comes from a lot of sources. Now, one area of market research which hasn't been discussed by any of the speakers so far is the role of universities, etc. And I have to put a little bit of Guernsey for us eggheads. Universities actually, not only staff but also students, are a fantastic source of research. I'm all in favour of using private research companies. A lot of them do excellent work. But also too, one of our best resources, and I can tell you this, are my students. Not my students, but also remember, tourism is actually taught at 25 universities around Australia. So I'm not just doing a big Guernsey for UTS. Southern Cross University, Charles Sturt University, University of Western Sydney, Flinders University, Adelaide. 25 universities around Australia have academics who are always doing research and who want to do more research which can help you. But also too, all those 25 universities have hundreds of students who are all doing projects who'll do research for you for free. Use them. We have a thing at UTS called the Tourism Industry Project. We have 100 third-year students who partner themselves with a company, and the company says, look, we want this piece of research done, can you do it? Those kids spend a year doing that piece of research. Doesn't cost you a brass razoo, that there's bloody good research. Why? Because they're doing it for a high distinction. They're not doing it for money. So there's a lot of passion out there. I've always believed if you work with the university, the TAFE sector, other colleges too, like the Blue Mountains Hotel School, there's a lot of colleges, I'm not just doing a Guernsey for universities, educational institutions can be great allies for you and very cheap allies. Okay, couple of other things. I know I don't want to cover on what's been covered. Use the trade press, very, very helpful. Okay, the other thing too is become a member, if you're not, with groups like ATEC, the Australian Tourism Export Council. They're dedicated to trying to bring inbound tourism to all parts of Australia. I know that, for example, the Outback Tourism is probably very involved already with ATEC, but if you feel that you want to have a say in it, make sure you do things. The other thing, which is a really critical point to get your message across, is when there are travel shows in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and other places which are or Adelaide in particular, which are all potential source markets for you here, make sure you get your message out. I remember my sister and her one-time husband used to live in Nambucca Heads. He was actually the editor of the local newspaper, and he used to get, pardon my French, he used to get really pissed off with the Coffs Coast Tourism Organisation because they would have a stand at the Holiday and Travel Show in Sydney, and they were supposed to represent all of the towns and cities and villages around there. All they did was talk about Coffs Harbour. Now, you could have a case here, I'm not suggesting Outback Tourism would do that, but it's very important to make sure that your business, your region, your town, your area is represented. That's really critical, because otherwise what happens is Big Brother will worry about Big Brother and forget about the other regions. That's important. The other thing too, which is really critical is, and I mentioned this before, give travellers reasons, not just reasons, but really huge reasons to prolong their stay. Once you've got them here, keep enticing them, and people will do it. You know, fortunately, I know part of the market for here is the grey nomad market, and the grey nomads are pretty flexible. Backpackers, pretty flexible. So there are elements of the market which are very flexible, and you know, there are lots of ways you can encourage them to stay, and they'll stay if they are aware of what's on offer. Okay.
Get them here and then flood the roads.
Yes, but if you've got the message out before they arrive, they'll want to stay longer in the first place. Now, also too, I can't stress strongly enough, there are some really good campaigns that TAA, Tourism Australia, is running. Get with the strength, particularly the No Leave, No Life campaign, good campaigns. And also too, the Nothing Like Australia, which is a huge benefit from your point of view here in Outback Australia, is that they are always pushing the authentic, unique Australian experience. You guys have got it in spades. So, you know, get really on board with that particular campaign. Very quick here, you should be aware of most of this, but this is just a small selection of travel industry media you can get your message out to not only travel agents and travel professionals in Australia, but also to companies like John Z Global Media operate not only in Australia, but Asia, America. I do regular writing for eTurbo News, which is a US-based publication. It's read by it has 235,000 travel industry subscribers around the world. It costs you nothing to put an article in there about Outback Tourism. And it's read by all those people, mainly by Americans. There are a lot of ways that you can promote yourself without paying any money. It's just understand what the options are. Most of those options don't require you to advertise, although they'd like you to. I'm sure John's organisation would love you to pay lots of advertising, but you can still put articles about where you're up, what you're on about, and what you're up to in those media, and that'll get your message out around the world. Okay, once there has been a problem in an area, Sandy Holway, and I'm sure you've all heard of, many of you would have heard of Sandy Holway. For those of you who haven't, he was the guy who put the Sydney Olympics together. He also too played a very important role in dealing with two crises. One was the Canberra bushfires of 2003, and the second one was Cyclone Larry in 2006. Sandy Holway gave a talk, and I never forgot this. I actually reported on it for eTurbo News. It was in the Gold Coast, and these were his 10 commandments about recovering, destinations recovering from a crisis. The most important one of the 10 commandments, and you can look at this at your leisure, because this is all going to be downloaded, isn't it, for everybody? Okay, so the most important one is about building back better. So if there's been a flood, if there's been a bushfire, if there's been a drought, it's not just about putting back things the way they were, it's about making things better. Next week, I'm going to Japan. I'm speaking at a conference which has been run by the prefecture of Okinawa about Japan recovering from the tsunami. That was a real crisis for Japan because tourism to Japan dropped by 60%. My very simple message to the Japanese is about building back better and restoring confidence and letting people know that tourists are not only welcome, but they're there. And also, too, not to give 500 mixed messages about radioactivity. That's really critical. They need to have a single message. And certainly when there is recovery from a negative event, there needs to be a single unified message. You can decide who's going to provide that, whether it be Outback New South Wales or whichever organisation, but don't try and mix the messages because you get people confused. Okay. Now I've talked very quickly, because I've been told to be quick, market research on a shoestring. I've given you a few clues. Universities, as well as the private market researchers and the Tourism New South Wales, Destination New South Wales and all these other organisations, one of the great sources that you have are thousands of students studying tourism at 25 universities and yet another 25 or so other different higher educational institutions who want to work with you, plus of course their humble lecturers, professors and everybody else. So we are a resource for you, and we can actually do the job pretty well. Okay, let me just, what's happened here? Oh, okay. I seem to have, sorry. Okay. Very quick, couple of other quick things. Media hostings, and I don't know, I missed out to hear what John had to say about this, but I'll give you something from Barry Matheson, who used to run the Great Outdoors. And this was a message that he actually gave out at a conference I organised a couple of years ago, which John was a co-organiser in, I might add. Barry was saying, if you're going to host somebody like Sydney Weekender, Getaway, any of these lifestyle programs, and believe me, I swear by them. I used to work for a wholesaler. We hosted Getaway about 20 times in the Eastern Mediterranean, and Getaway was a pain in the arse to deal with. They cost a fair bit of money for us, but the publicity that they gave to our programs was magical. It was worth every penny times 10. Now the good thing here, if you're hosting one of those lifestyle programs, whether it's, what's his name, Whitney, the guy from Sydney Weekender, Mike Whitney from Sydney Weekender, or whether it's the Getaway crew, make sure if they're coming to Broken Hill or Lightning Ridge or Burke or wherever it is, or Wentworth, that they have multiple things to do. You don't want to just get them out here just to flog a particular hotel or to flog a particular park. Give them multiple reasons so they'll do the whole show on that area. That was the advice, actually. That's not my advice. This is actually the advice of people who actually organise these programs. I've worked very closely with the producer of Getaway on many occasions before we helped them. And he says, we will come out and do multiple stories about a destination. So they might do a story which will cover a couple of accommodation options, a couple of restaurants, a few attractions, maybe it's a particular tour. So get them, these are a great resource. And again, when we talk about marketing in tough times, and I think other people have already said this, you might be competitors in many ways, but you have a common interest. You all want people to come here. So this is where you start to cooperate. Okay. Okay. So anyway, this is Barry Matheson's piece of advice. I'll just pass that on here. He's just decided to play silly buggers here. Okay, the other thing which is also helpful in terms of getting interest, and I know it's something that Broken Hill's very good at, events. Okay, I've got one more minute. So make sure that you're staging events. I'll probably finish up on this point because we've sort of got a bit strapped for time, but here's a few good ideas. Advertising. The budget's limited, the need to get people to come back is great. Band together. One thing I used to do when I used to run the Israel Tourism Office, my advertising budget for the year to cover Australia, New Zealand and the South Pacific was $10,000 a year. I could blow that in one ad. So what we used to do a lot, one of my many ways to stretch the budget is that when I was putting out a message, a positive message about the destination, I'd do a club ad with about 10 wholesalers, a couple of airlines and a few other people, which cost to me as the National Tourist Office a couple of $100 that we were able to put out by clubbing together. We put out a $2,000 or $3,000 ad. That's important, do it. The other thing too about incentives, we in the travel industry, I might finish on this one, have a disease. We call it the financial striptease. When anything goes wrong, what do? We drop our prices, we expose our bottom line. That's what we in the industry do. We're really good at it. Don't do it. Value add. Discounting is not an evil thing in its own right, but we tend to be doing it all the time. It's one of the pieces of advice I give out, particularly in Asia, who are very prone to doing this. John will know this question well because we've both done work in Fiji. I really upset the Fijians by telling them that they were being idiots by engaging in price dropping, because what happens once you've dropped your prices, consumers out there are going to say, gee, these are good prices, why haven't they always done this? And when you try to get them back up to a sustainable level, you get buyer resistance. Incentivise by all means. Combine attractions. Share perhaps a free this or a free that, which isn't going to cost you as a business very much money, but will certainly get people in. Don't just go and do what so many travel industry people do and just discount holers bowlers. I know it's easy to say, but by God, it's really hard to correct yourself from that area. Now, I've been sort of given the wind-up, so I'm going to wind up at this stage, but I hope that I've given you a little bit of food for thought in terms of dealing with tourism in tough times. It's a very important topic. It's one which we as an industry really have to get behind, and I thank you very, very much for your attention. And if anyone's got a question, if we've got time for questions, but you can ask me later.
That was a very good presentation, and again, probably could have listened to you for a few hours. We'll have to do that on the plane. Again, another round.